In the dead silence of a Tuesday morning, Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez thought she was walking into another routine security briefing at Fort Blackwater. She had no idea that within the next 47 minutes, a single moment of violence would expose a conspiracy so deep that it would require 3-star generals to arrive by emergency helicopter, seal every gate, and place the entire military installation under complete lockdown. What started as an ordinary day for a dedicated soldier would become the catalyst for one of the most classified investigations in modern military history. But Maria wouldn't remember any of it. Not the blow that shattered her skull, not the secrets she accidentally uncovered, and certainly not the powerful forces that would stop at nothing to keep those secrets buried forever.
Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez had always been the kind of soldier who arrived 15 minutes early to everything. On that Tuesday morning in March, she walked through the gray corridors of Building 7 at Fort Blackwater with her usual purposeful stride, her polished boots echoing against the linoleum floors.
The base felt different somehow, though she couldn't put her finger on why. Maybe it was the unusual number of unmarked vehicles she'd noticed in the parking lot, or the way Sergeant Mills had avoided eye contact when she'd greeted him at the security checkpoint. Maria had been stationed at Fort Blackwater for 3 years, working in communications and intelligence coordination. She knew every corner of the base, every routine, every face. Fort Blackwater wasn't like other military installations. It was smaller, more specialized, and significantly more secretive. Both soldiers stationed there never knew exactly what went on in the restricted sections of the base. Maria had always been content with that arrangement until recently. The briefing she was heading to that morning was supposed to be routine. Colonel Henderson had called it a standard security update for communications personnel. Maria had attended dozens of similar meetings over the years. She expected to hear about new protocols, maybe some updates to encryption procedures, perhaps a reminder about information security. She certainly didn't expect to stumble into something that would change her life forever. As she turned the corner toward Conference Room C, Maria noticed the door to the restricted archive room standing slightly ajar. This was unusual. That room was always locked, always secure. She'd walked past it hundreds of times, and the door had never been anything but tightly sealed. Her training kicked in automatically. Protocol dictated that she should report any security irregularities immediately. She approached the door cautiously, her hand instinctively moving toward her radio. Through the narrow gap, she could see stacks of file boxes and computer equipment. Nothing seemed obviously wrong, but something felt off. As she reached for her radio to call security, she heard voices coming from inside the room. Low, urgent voices speaking in hushed tones. Maria hesitated. She should call security, but something made her pause. The voices weren't speaking English. They were speaking what sounded like Russian. Her blood ran cold. She had studied Russian in her intelligence training, and while she wasn't fluent, she could understand enough to know that these weren't American personnel having a casual conversation. She pressed closer to the door, straining to hear more clearly. The words she could make out sent chills down her spine. They were discussing file transfers, payment schedules, and something about a submarine base on the East Coast. Maria's mouth went dry. This wasn't just a security breach. This was espionage, and it was happening right here on her base. One of the voices was familiar, though she couldn't place it immediately. A man's voice speaking accented English now, saying something about completing the transfer before the inspection next week. Maria's mind raced. What inspection? What transfer? And who were these people? She knew she should back away, call for help, follow protocol. But her feet seemed rooted to the spot. She had to know more. Slowly, carefully, she pushed the door open just a fraction more, trying to get a better view of what was happening inside. The room was larger than she'd expected, extending back into what must have been a converted storage area. She could see 3 figures hunched over a table covered with documents and what looked like computer drives. One was a tall man in civilian clothes. Another was wearing a uniform she didn't recognize, and the third had his back to her. Maria's heart pounded as she tried to process what she was seeing. This was clearly a clandestine meeting, and based on what she'd overheard, it involved the transfer of sensitive military information to foreign agents. She had to document this somehow, get proof, alert the proper authorities. She carefully reached for her phone, thinking she could at least take a photo as evidence. But as she lifted the device, the third figure turned around, and Maria's blood turned to ice. It was Colonel Henderson, her commanding officer, the man who had called the briefing she was supposed to attend, was standing in a restricted room having what appeared to be a treasonous conversation with foreign agents. The shock of recognition made her gasp audibly. In that instant, all three men turned toward the door. Maria found herself staring directly into Colonel Henderson's eyes, and she saw the exact moment when he realized who she was and what she had witnessed. Time seemed to slow down. Maria turned to run, but she knew it was too late. She had seen too much, heard too much. Her mind raced with the implications of what she had discovered. How long had this been going on? How many other people were involved? How much classified information had already been compromised? She ran down the corridor as fast as she could, her mind spinning with plans. She had to get to a secure phone, had to contact someone she could trust. But who? If Colonel Henderson was involved, how many others might be compromised? She couldn't trust anyone on base until she knew the full extent of the conspiracy. Behind her, she could hear footsteps and urgent voices. They were following her, and she knew her life was now in danger. She had stumbled onto something massive, something that people would kill to protect. Her 3 years of quiet service at Fort Blackwater had suddenly become a deadly game of cat and mouse. Maria reached the main corridor and saw Sergeant Mills approaching from the other direction. For a moment, relief flooded through her. Mills was a good soldier, someone she'd worked with many times. But as he got closer, she saw something in his expression that made her stomach drop. He wasn't surprised to see her running. He was expecting her. "Sergeant Rodriguez," he called out, his voice strangely calm. "Colonel Henderson needs to see you immediately." Maria's blood turned to ice. Mills was part of it too. How deep did this conspiracy go? How many people at Fort Blackwater were involved in selling secrets to foreign governments? She realized she might be the only person on the entire base who wasn't compromised. She changed direction, heading toward the exit, but Mills moved to block her path. Behind her, she could hear Colonel Henderson and the other men emerging from the archive room. She was trapped in the middle of a corridor surrounded by people who now saw her as a deadly threat to their operation. "There's nowhere to run, Maria," Colonel Henderson called out, his voice no longer carrying the authority she had always respected. Now it sounded cold, calculating, dangerous. "We need to talk." Maria looked around desperately, searching for any possible escape route. She knew the base layout better than almost anyone, but she also knew that these men had the advantage of numbers and planning. They had been operating this conspiracy for who knows how long, and they had protocols in place for dealing with exactly this kind of situation. Her only chance was to reach the communication center and send out a distress signal before they could stop her. If she could alert someone outside the base, someone who wasn't part of the conspiracy, there might still be hope. But first she had to get past the men who were now closing in on her from both directions. Maria feinted toward Mills, then quickly changed direction, heading for the stairwell that led to the upper floors. If she could reach the communications center on the 3rd floor, she might be able to send out an emergency transmission before they caught up with her. She bounded up the stairs 2 at a time, hearing heavy footsteps behind her. Her lungs burned as she climbed, adrenaline pushing her forward. She could hear Colonel Henderson shouting orders to other personnel, calling for a lockdown of the building. Her worst fears were being confirmed. This wasn't just a small group of conspirators. This was a coordinated operation involving multiple people throughout the base hierarchy. Reaching the 3rd floor, Maria sprinted toward the communications center, fumbling for her access card. Behind her, she could hear more footsteps on the stairs. They were gaining on her, and she was running out of time. She had seconds to get into the communications room and send out a signal for help. As she rounded the final corner, she saw the door to the communications center ahead. Her access card was in her hand, ready to swipe. Just a few more steps and she could alert the outside world to what was happening at Fort Blackwater. She could expose the conspiracy and save whatever classified information hadn't already been compromised. But as she reached for the card reader, a hand grabbed her shoulder from behind. She spun around to see Mills just inches away, his face grim with determination. Before she could react, she saw his other hand coming toward her head, something heavy clutched in his grip. The last thing Maria remembered was the sickening sound of impact and the sudden, overwhelming darkness that followed. When Maria Rodriguez regained consciousness, the world came back in fragments. First, there was the antiseptic smell that told her she was in a medical facility. Then came the throbbing pain in her head, so intense it made her stomach churn. Slowly, voices began to filter through the fog in her mind. Concerned voices, professional voices, voices discussing her condition as if she weren't there. Patient shows signs of severe concussion. A woman's voice was saying, "Significant trauma to the left temporal region. She's been unconscious for 18 hours.
18 hours. The number hit Maria like a physical blow.
She tried to remember what had happened, but her memories felt scattered, like puzzle pieces that wouldn't fit together properly. She remembered walking through the base that morning, remembered feeling like something was different, but everything after that was hazy and confusing. Dr. Chen, her vitals are stabilizing, another voice said. Should we notify her commanding officer that she's conscious? Maria tried to speak, but her throat felt raw and dry. She managed to open her eyes slightly, squinting against the harsh fluorescent lights. She was in the base medical facility, lying in one of the intensive care beds. Through the small window, she could see it was dark outside. A full day had passed since whatever had happened to her. Dr. Chen appeared at her bedside, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a gentle manner. Maria had met her a few times during routine medical checkups. She was one of the civilian contractors who worked on base, not military personnel. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. Dr. Chen said softly. Can you hear me? You've suffered a serious head injury. Try not to move too much. Maria managed to nod slightly, which sent waves of pain through her skull. What happened? She whispered. Dr. Chen consulted her clipboard. According to the report, you fell down the stairwell in Building 7, hit your head on the concrete steps. A maintenance worker found you and called for medical assistance immediately.
Fell down the stairwell.
The words didn't feel right, but Maria couldn't grasp why. Her memories of that morning remained frustratingly unclear.
She remembered walking through Building 7, remembered feeling anxious about something, but the specific details remained locked behind a wall of pain and confusion.
I don't remember falling, Maria said, struggling to form the words.
That's completely normal with this type of head trauma, Dr. Chen assured her. Retrograde amnesia is common with concussions of this severity. Your memories of the incident may never fully return. Over the next few hours, as Maria drifted in and out of consciousness, a parade of visitors came to check on her. Sergeant Mills stopped by, looking genuinely concerned and relieved that she was awake. He told her how worried everyone had been, how the entire communications unit had been asking about her condition. Colonel Henderson also visited, bringing flowers and expressing his sincere hopes for her quick recovery. He seemed like the caring commanding officer she had always known, showing no sign of the sinister figure she had vague, troubling memories of encountering. His presence made her feel safe and confused at the same time. Take all the time you need to recover, Rodriguez, he said kindly. Your position will be waiting for you when you're ready to return to duty. The base isn't the same without one of our best communications specialists. But something about his visit left Maria feeling unsettled. There was something in his eyes, a watchfulness that seemed at odds with his concerned words. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was studying her, evaluating how much she remembered about something important. Dr. Chen kept her under observation for 3 more days. During that time, Maria's physical condition improved significantly, but her memory of the incident remained completely blank. She could remember everything up to walking through Building 7 that morning, and she could remember waking up in the medical facility, but the hours in between were gone. She tried to piece together what might have happened based on the physical evidence. The stairs in Building 7 were steep, and the concrete was unforgiving. It was certainly possible that she could have tripped and fallen, especially if she had been distracted or hurrying to get to her briefing on time. But something about the explanation felt incomplete. On her second day in the medical facility, something strange happened that made her question the official story even more. Dr. Chen was out of the room when a man she didn't recognize entered. He was wearing a suit, not a uniform, and he had the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, he said, pulling up a chair beside her bed. I'm Agent Morrison with the Department of Defense Inspector General's office. I need to ask you a few questions about your accident. Maria looked at him with confusion. Why would the Inspector General's office be interested in someone falling downstairs? Morrison smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We're conducting a routine investigation into safety protocols at Fort Blackwater. Your accident was the 4th incident in Building 7 this year. We want to make sure there aren't any structural issues that need to be addressed. Something about his explanation didn't sit right with Maria, but her head was still too foggy to think clearly. Morrison asked her detailed questions about what she remembered from that morning, whether she had noticed anything unusual, whether anyone else had been in the building at the time. His questions seemed far too specific for a routine safety investigation. I'm sorry, Maria said finally. I really don't remember anything about the fall. Dr. Chen says that's normal with this type of head injury. Morrison nodded sympathetically. Of course, head injuries can be very disorienting. Sometimes people think they remember things that didn't actually happen, or they mix up dreams with reality. If you do happen to remember anything unusual, anything at all, it's important that you discuss it with medical personnel first. They can help you determine what's real and what might be confusion from the injury. After he left, Maria felt more unsettled than before.
At this point, she says,
His warning about mixing up dreams with reality seemed oddly specific, as if he was preparing her to dismiss any memories that might return. But why would he care about that unless there was something specific he was worried she might remember? That night, Maria had her first dream about the incident. In the dream, she was running through the corridors of Building 7, her heart pounding with fear. She was trying to reach something, trying to call for help, but people were chasing her. In the dream, she could see faces of people she knew, people she trusted, but they looked different somehow. Threatening, she woke up in a cold sweat, her head throbbing. The dream felt incredibly real, more like a memory than a nightmare. But Morrison's words echoed in her mind. Head injuries could cause confusion between dreams and reality. Maybe her subconscious was just creating dramatic scenarios to fill in the blank spaces in her memory. Doctor? Chen released her from the medical facility on Friday with strict instructions to take it easy and return immediately if she experienced any worsening symptoms. As Maria walked back to her barracks, she noticed something that struck her as odd. The parking lot that had been full of unmarked vehicles on Tuesday morning was now completely normal. Only standard military and personal vehicles were visible. She mentioned this observation to her roommate, Corporal Jenkins, who looked at her with confusion. Unmarked vehicles, Jenkins said. I don't remember seeing any unusual vehicles this week. Are you sure you're not thinking of last month when we had those contractors working on the communications array? Maria frowned. She was certain she had seen the vehicles on Tuesday morning, but Jenkins had been on base all week and would have noticed anything unusual. Maybe her memory was more scrambled than she realized. Over the weekend, Maria tried to rest and recover, but she found herself becoming increasingly restless. There was something nagging at the edge of her consciousness, some important detail that felt just out of reach. She kept having flashes of images and sensations that felt significant, but she couldn't piece them together into a coherent narrative. On Sunday evening, she decided to take a walk around the base to clear her head. As she passed Building 7, she felt a strong urge to go inside. Dr. Chen had warned her about returning to the site of traumatic incidents too soon, but Maria felt like she needed to see the stairwell where she had fallen.
the building was mostly empty on Sunday evening with only a few personnel working late shifts.
Maria made her way to the stairwell and stood at the top, looking down at the concrete steps. According to the report, she had fallen from the third-floor landing all the way down to the first floor. Would have been a serious fall, certainly enough to cause the injury she had sustained. But as she stood there, fragments of memory began to surface. She remembered being on the third floor, but she hadn't been walking toward the stairs. She had been running towards something else. The communications center. She had been trying to reach the communications center for some urgent reason. The memory hit her like a physical blow. She had discovered something important and dangerous. There had been people in a restricted room, people who shouldn't have been there, foreign agents, and Colonel Henderson had been with them. Maria gripped the stair railing as more memories came flooding back. The conversation she had overheard, the documents and computer drives, the chase through the corridors. She hadn't fallen down the stairs. Someone had hit her, had deliberately injured her to prevent her from exposing what she had seen. Her hands shook as the full scope of what had happened became clear. There was a conspiracy operating right here on Fort Blackwater, and she had stumbled into it. The people she trusted, the people she had served under for years, were selling military secrets to foreign governments. And when she had tried to stop them, they had nearly killed her. But now they thought she didn't remember. They thought the head injury had wiped out her memories of that morning, leaving them safe to continue their operations. Agent Morrison's visit made sense now. He wasn't from the Inspector General's office at all. He had been checking to see how much she remembered, and his warning about confusing dreams with reality had been designed to make her doubt any memories that returned. Maria realized she was in terrible danger. If the conspirators discovered that her memories had returned, they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate her permanently. She had to be very careful about how she proceeded. She couldn't trust anyone on base, couldn't use any of the normal channels for reporting suspicious activity. For all she knew, the entire chain of command was compromised. As she stood in the stairwell where she had nearly died, Maria began to formulate a plan. She would have to gather evidence secretly, document the conspiracy, and find a way to contact authorities outside the base who weren't part of the operation. It would be dangerous and difficult, but she was the only one who knew the truth about what was happening at Fort Blackwater. She had survived their attempt to silence her, and now she was going to make sure they paid for their betrayal. But first she had to convince everyone that she was still the confused, memory-impaired soldier they thought they had created. Her life and possibly national security depended on her ability to play that role convincingly while she worked to expose the truth.
Maria Rodriguez had become an expert at pretending. For 2 weeks after her memories returned, she maintained the perfect facade of a confused soldier recovering from a serious head injury.
She attended her medical follow-up appointments, complained about headaches and memory problems, and appeared grateful for the patience and understanding of her commanding officers. All the while, she was conducting the most dangerous investigation of her military career.
Her approach was methodical and careful. She couldn't afford to make any mistakes that would alert the conspirators to her recovered memory. Every move had to appear natural. Every question had to seem innocent. She started by establishing a baseline of normal behavior, making sure that everyone saw her as the same dedicated but slightly impaired soldier they expected. During her first week back on limited duty, Maria paid attention to patterns and schedules. She nodded when certain personnel came and went, which areas of the base seemed to have unusual activity, and which secure areas had changes in access protocols. She was looking for the infrastructure of the conspiracy, the logistics that would be necessary to operate a long-term espionage ring. What she discovered was more extensive than she had initially feared. The operation wasn't limited to Colonel Henderson and a few associates.
It appeared to involve at least a dozen personnel across multiple departments, including communications, logistics, security, and administration. They had created a sophisticated network that could access, copy, and transmit classified information while maintaining perfect operational security.
Maria's breakthrough came when she volunteered to work weekend shifts in the communications center.
The conspirators seemed pleased that she was eager to return to her normal duties, and they probably saw her weekend volunteering as a sign that she suspected nothing. But Maria had a specific purpose in mind. Fort Blackwater's communications systems were connected to a broader military network that included automated logging and backup systems. Every transmission, every file access, every security protocol activation was recorded somewhere in the system. The conspirators had been careful to avoid obvious traces during regular business hours, but Maria suspected they might have been less cautious during low-activity periods when fewer people were monitoring the systems.
Working alone in the communications center on Saturday night, Maria accessed the historical logs using her legitimate credentials. She couldn't search for anything too specific without raising red flags, but she could review general system activity patterns and look for anomalies. What she found confirmed her worst suspicions. Over the past 8 months, there had been dozens of unusual data transfers during off hours, particularly on weekends and holidays. The transfers involved large files from secure databases being copied to external drives or transmitted to unauthorized locations. The pattern was subtle but consistent, suggesting a well-organized operation that had been running for nearly a year.
More disturbing was the discovery that many of these transfers had occurred during periods when she had been scheduled to work but had been reassigned to other duties at the last minute. Someone had been carefully managing her schedule to ensure she wouldn't be in the communications center when illegal activities were taking place.
They had been planning around her presence for months, which meant they had identified her as a potential security risk long before she had accidentally discovered their meeting. Maria printed the relevant log entries using a printer that wasn't connected to the main network, carefully hiding the pages in her personal belongings. She now had documentary evidence of the conspiracy, but she needed more than just suspicious data transfers. She needed proof of what was being stolen and where it was going. Her opportunity came the following Tuesday, exactly 3 weeks after her original discovery. Maria had established a routine of taking evening walks around the base as part of her recovery regimen. The medical staff had encouraged light exercise, and everyone had become accustomed to seeing her wandering around the base at various times of day. During one of these walks, she noticed unusual activity around Building 7. Several vehicles were parked nearby, including one of the unmarked sedans she remembered seeing on the morning of her injury. Her pulse quickened as she realized that another exchange was probably taking place. This time, Maria was prepared.
She had acquired a small digital camera during a weekend trip off base, claiming she wanted to take photos to help with her memory recovery. She had also studied the building's layout extensively, identifying multiple observation points and escape routes. Moving carefully through the shadows, Maria positioned herself where she could observe the entrance to the restricted archive room. She didn't have to wait long. Just after sunset, she saw Colonel Henderson approaching with 2 men in civilian clothes. One was the tall man she remembered from her original discovery. The other was someone new. As they entered the building, Maria circled around to a maintenance area, where she had previously noticed a window that offered a view into the archive room. The window was small and positioned high on the wall, but it provided enough visibility for her to see what was happening inside. Through the camera's zoom function, Maria was able to document the entire meeting. She photographed the participants, the documents being exchanged, and the computer equipment being used. Most importantly, she captured images of what appeared to be submarine blueprints and communication encryption codes spread across the table. The evidence was overwhelming. Colonel Henderson and his associates were systematically stealing some of the military's most sensitive secrets and selling them to foreign agents. The scope of the operation was staggering, involving everything from naval technology to communication protocols to personnel records. But as Maria prepared to leave her observation point, she made a crucial mistake. In her excitement over finally obtaining solid evidence, she accidentally activated the camera's flash while trying to take one final photograph. The bright light illuminated the window for just an instant, but it was enough to alert the people inside. Maria saw Colonel Henderson's head snap toward the window, his eyes scanning the darkness outside. She ducked down immediately, her heart pounding, but she knew she had been detected. The meeting inside broke up quickly and she could hear urgent voices and movement. She had seconds to escape before they came looking for her. Maria abandoned stealth in favor of speed, running through the base toward her barracks as quickly as she could. Behind her, she could hear doors slamming and vehicles starting. They knew someone had been watching, and it wouldn't take them long to figure out who. Back in her room, Maria quickly hid the camera and the printed documents in a location she had prepared for exactly this contingency. She then lay down on her bed and pretended to be asleep, controlling her breathing and trying to slow her racing heart. 20 minutes later, there was a knock on her door.
Maria answered it groggily, as if she had been awakened from deep sleep.
Sergeant Mills stood in the hallway with two security personnel she didn't recognize. "Sorry to disturb you, Rodriguez," Mills said. "We've had reports of suspicious activity around your building tonight. Someone may have been attempting to break into secure areas. Did you hear anything unusual?" Maria rubbed her eyes and appeared confused. "No, nothing. I've been asleep for the past few hours. My head was bothering me, so I took some pain medication and went to bed early." Mills studied her carefully, but her performance was convincing. "Well, if you do remember hearing anything, or if you notice anything strange around the base, report it immediately."
What's the contest to? Is it the book?
"We take security very seriously, especially with your recent accident." After they left, Maria knew her time was running out. They suspected her, and it was only a matter of time before they found evidence of her investigation. She had to act quickly to get her information to the proper authorities before the conspirators could silence her permanently. The next morning, Maria called in sick and left the base using a routine medical appointment as her cover. Instead of going to the doctor, she drove to the nearest city and found an internet cafe where she could send encrypted emails without being traced back to Fort Blackwater. She had researched the appropriate contacts during her investigation, identifying several agencies and officials who were outside the normal military chain of command and therefore unlikely to be compromised. She sent detailed reports with copies of her evidence to the FBI's Counterintelligence Division, the Department of Defense Inspector General's office, and the Senate Intelligence Committee. Her message was simple and urgent. Fort Blackwater had been infiltrated by a foreign espionage ring, and immediate action was required to prevent further damage to national security. She provided the names of known conspirators, detailed evidence of their activities, and specific recommendations for how to safely investigate and shut down the operation. Maria returned to the base that afternoon, knowing it would probably be her last day there as a free person. The conspirators would undoubtedly make another attempt to eliminate her once they realized the scope of her knowledge. But she had done everything she could to ensure that their operation would be exposed regardless of what happened to her. She didn't have to wait long for a response. The next morning, Maria was awakened by the sound of helicopters landing on the base. Looking out her window, she saw military vehicles surrounding all the major buildings and armed personnel establishing perimeters around secure areas. 3 generals had arrived overnight and immediately placed Fort Blackwater under complete lockdown. Every gate was sealed, all communications were cut except for official channels, and no one was allowed to leave or enter the base without express authorization from the highest levels of command. The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. Colonel Henderson and his associates were arrested within hours, along with the foreign agents who had been operating on and around the base. The scope of the conspiracy was even larger than Maria had realized, involving contacts at other military installations and a network of civilian accomplices. Maria spent 3 days being debriefed by investigators from multiple agencies. They were amazed by the extent of evidence she had gathered and the courage she had shown in pursuing the investigation despite the obvious danger to herself. Her quick thinking and dedication had prevented what could have been one of the most damaging security breaches in modern military history. The final tally was staggering. The conspirators had stolen and sold information worth millions of dollars, including submarine designs, radar technology, communication encryption methods, and detailed intelligence on military capabilities and deployments. Some of the information had already been passed to hostile foreign governments, requiring extensive damage control and the revision of numerous military protocols. But thanks to Maria's investigation, the ring was completely shut down before it could do even more damage. Every conspirator was identified and arrested, every compromised system was secured, and every piece of stolen information was accounted for. 6 months later, Maria Rodriguez was promoted to Master Sergeant and received the Distinguished Service Medal for her actions at Fort Blackwater. She was reassigned to a new position at the Pentagon, where her experience with counterintelligence made her invaluable in preventing future security breaches.
The blow to her skull had been intended to silence her forever, but instead it had set in motion events that exposed one of the most dangerous espionage operations in recent history. What started as an ordinary Tuesday morning had become a testament to the courage and dedication of one soldier who refused to let traitors succeed in their betrayal of everything she had sworn to protect.